Now we're going to talk about bellhooks. The main concept of bellhooks theory in this week's reading is marginality. She teaches us that marginal groups and their views and experiences are invaluable. In her thinking, strategic marginality provides individuals and scholars with unique and critical vantage points. Marginal women, she argues, experience both the unique problems of being a woman and being a minority in our society. They belong to both groups. They're burdened by the issues and inequalities both groups suffer. And they can provide both the insider and outsider view of these issues because they are both insiders and outsiders in both groups at the same time. In order to understand bell hooks, we first need to have a basic understanding of the feminist theory and feminist movement in the United States. We need this basic understanding because bell hooks' work emerged as a reaction to the dominant forms of feminism and dominant theory of feminism. The feminist movement in the United States began in 1848 and went through three significant phases. We call these phases the first, the second, and the third waves of feminism. The first wave began with the Seneca Falls Convention and the Declaration of Sentiments. The Declaration of Sentiments borrowed the language from the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, as you know, states that all men are created equal. The Declaration of Sentiments instead stated that all men and women are created equal. It argued that several civil liberties were denied to women and demanded that those civil liberties to be granted. The primary goal of the movement was to gain the voting rights for women. The first wave of feminist movement was dominated by white women and consequently it addressed their concerns. Many black women supported the movement, but they also felt like outsiders because the movement was not addressing their issues. White women at the time were asking for the right to vote. Yes, the right to vote was an important issue for black women as well, but at the time, not even black men had this right. So the black women in the United States found themselves in between two struggles. They could support black men in their struggle for racial equality, or support their white female partners, comrades, in their struggle for gender equality. Yes, sexism and gender discrimination were important issues for black women, but they were not only burdened by sexism, but also racism at the same time. And the feminist movement, at least during the first wave of feminism, did not address their double burdens. Nevertheless, the first wave of feminist movement succeeded and achieved its purpose of women gaining the right to vote in 1920. This was the end of the first wave of feminism. The second wave of feminism began in the 1960s. Between 1920 and 60, women's movement in the United States remained largely quiet. It was there, but it was not a strong political movement. This, of course, had something to do with the World War II and its after effects. During the World War II, however, an important change occurred in our society. Considerably large numbers of women in the United States entered the workforce because men were away and fighting the war. After the war, men returned and the companies began favoring men and the war veterans one more time and began laying off women workers. This, of course, created a contention. After a brief period of celebrating men's return to home, feminist movement began to gain strength again, and second wave of feminism emerged in 1960s. But again, as you may have already guessed, 1960s were the time of the civil rights movement in the United States. Black men and women collectively supported the civil rights movement, participated in it. But this meant the gender issues in the black community one more time were put on the back burner. Consequently, the feminist theory during the first and second waves of feminism evolved and developed without much attention to the ethnic racial diversity and created a discourse of quote-unquote global sisterhood. This discourse assumed that all women all around the world were sisters, and they, regardless of their ethnic, racial, national, or material circumstances, suffer from the same type of male domination and sought and desired the same solutions. This discourse and the view dominated the feminist movement until late 1990s. Even today, there are feminist scholars who subscribe to this worldview. As you can imagine, this worldview privileges white women and it creates invisible hierarchies within the feminist theory itself. It positions the white women as the leaders of the feminist movement and tells the rest to simply follow their footsteps. This view overlooks at the diversity within women and the diversity of their issues. It ignores the specific material conditions, culture, ethnic, racial, or national circumstances that may be plaguing the women's lives, different women's lives. So this makes it difficult, if not impossible, to address these specific circumstances and find solutions to them. So the third wave feminism emerged as a response to this global sisterhood idea. BellHooks is one of those scholars who pointed to the need to acknowledge the diversity within the community of women. She disagreed with the idea of global sisterhood. She drew our attention to the specific race-related issues that burden the black women in the United States. And she says that black women in the United States have to contend not only with sexism and gender discrimination, but also racism and its ongoing long-term effects. Many scholars label these forms of oppressions as double or triple burden. But BellHooks sees marginality as an advantage. She says that biggest contribution to the feminist theory will come from the margins, because marginal women can see both the inside and the outside. Marginality, in her view, provides women a perfect site for resistance. They can speak to the oppressions of those who are inside and of those who are outside at the same time, because they experience both. So she offers decolonization of the feminist thought and the feminist theory as a solution. She invites scholars first to critique the invisible hierarchies of the feminist theory itself, so we can open up a space to discuss and address the specific conditions and specific problems of specific groups of women. Then she invites us to interrogate the power relations in our society. She draws our attention to the interrelated nature of race, ethnicity, gender, class, and asks feminists to interrogate all aspects of women's oppression, not only gender-related aspects of it. In her analysis, women become multidimensional beings. They are addressed not just as females, but as whole individuals, whole persons with their race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, class, material conditions, and with everything that makes them an individual. So her contribution to our understanding of women's issues is significant.